This video is going to cover the topic of percents. Be sure the date and topic are at the top of the page. The essential question to guide the video is, how is a percent like a ratio? Hopefully, we have all had some experiences with percentages. We hear and see percentages all the time in our daily life, whether we connect it to math or not. For example, we see things like 1% milk, or we get an 85% on a test, or we hear that 52% of people in a certain area voted for a particular candidate, right? So we see and hear these percentages around us all the time. But when you think about percents, do you ever stop and realize that percents are really just a type of ratio? And if you think about it, when you hear the word, right, it has that word per in it that we've been using a lot recently, especially when we talk about rate, right? So it's per cent. So when you think about it, a percent, right, is a ratio where you're looking at it per every 100, right? So it means for every or each 100 of something. So that 52% from up here, that was 52 out of every 100 people. 85% on your test meant it was 85 out of every 100 questions that you might take. For that reason, we often see percentages represented with a 100 grid. Since percentages are out of 100, we can make a 10 by 10 grid to represent the 100. So make sure you have that, right? We have our nice grid paper. Go ahead and make a 10 by 10 grid. And this would represent an entire 100. And if I wanted to, say, make 14% of this grid green, because it's out of 100 squares, I could just shade in 14 of these green. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and you do the same with whatever color, or you could write the letter G if that helps for green. I could also say I want to do 6% of this as yellow, right? And since it's out of 100, I can go ahead and use my yellow and fill in 6 of these as yellow, right? Or Y for yellow if you don't have a yellow marker. And some of you might be looking at this and thinking, we use this when we talk about fractions or decimals, right? And that's true, right? 14% green would be the same thing as saying it's 14 out of 100. That's what a percent is, right? So we can see it in fraction form. We could also say, well, that's 14 hundredths. And now we have it in decimal form. And you'll see percentages written sometimes and connected to fractions and decimals. So this 6% yellow would be like saying 6 out of 100 or 6 hundredths yellow, right? And so that's how I could describe this square. It's 14% green, 6% yellow. But when I think back to my examples that I said earlier, when someone gets an 85% on a test, we rarely are actually taking a test with 100 questions, right? Or if we hear 52% of the people voted for a candidate, probably it wasn't exactly 100 people who voted, right? And that's why it's important to remember back to this idea that a percent is a ratio. And more specifically, percent is a part to whole ratio. So we're not comparing blue to yellow, we're comparing blue to a whole number, for example. And something we've been working on with ratios is that we know that we can rewrite ratios in equivalent forms, right? So a percent is a ratio written in an equivalent form. And that equivalent ratio is one that is out of 100, right? So maybe you took a test out of 18 questions, but we turned it into an equivalent ratio out of 100 to describe what percentage you earned on that test. If we look at this quick little image, right, I have 4 red X's, and there are a total of 10 X's altogether. So I could write that as a ratio of 4 out of 10, right? So that would be a ratio of 4 out of 10. If I want to turn this into a percentage, I'm going to have to look for the equivalent ratio. And I have a couple ways to do it. I'm going to start by using our friend, the double number line. And in our double number line, my ratio is comparing red to the total. And what I know from the get-go is there are 4 red for every 10 total X's, right? But since I want to make this out of 100, I'm going to need to scale my double number line up so that it's out of 100, All right, and I can do this in lots of different ways, but a lot of you would say, oh, well, that's 10 times as many here, so I need to do 10 times as many here, so my number is 40. This would be 40 out of 100, or 40%. I could also do this as proportions or equivalent ratios, kind of in fraction form. And I could say, well, this is 4 out of 10 that are red, and I want to know what it is out of 100. So again, I'm going to multiply by 10. I have to do the same thing on top and bottom, which means this is, again, 40, and 40 out of 100 is 40%. Right? So I can say that 4 out of 10 is equivalent to 40%, the ratio out of 100. Now that was a super friendly one, right? I bet a lot of us already could think about that and see that 40% of the X's were red. But here's another one. So if a student correctly answered 14 out of 20 questions, what percentage did they get correct? And I'm going to do this both ways, the double number line and my proportion. Before I fill mine in, go ahead and choose the one you like to do, or do both first, right? And then you can go ahead and unpause and see if we agree with both of these, and you can add to the one you didn't try yet. How'd you do? Both using the double number line and using the equivalent ratio proportion format, I found out that that student must have earned 70% on the quiz, right? In my double number line, you can see I went by 20s, and then for total on the total line, and 14 on the top line, to keep those ratios equivalent all the way up until it was out of 100. Here's another example. There are 40 students, and 16 of the students play on a soccer team. The question you would have to figure out is what percentage of the students play on the soccer team. So again, the double number line can help here, or you could set up equivalent ratios in proportion form to figure out how many it would be if we made it an equivalent ratio out of 100. And again, both ways will work. Decide which makes sense for you, right? Maybe a little bit more visual with the double number line, or you want to just jump right into this equivalent ratio proportion format. Either way, go ahead and give it a try and figure out what it would be if we made this ratio out of 100, so we could call it a percentage of the students. Pause this, give it a try, and then we'll see how you did. How'd you do? I have over here on my proportion side that it was 40 out of 100, so this would be 40%. But I kind of left my double number line empty for a minute here to finish filling it in. I got as far as saying that if I had twice as many people, I would have twice as many soccer players, right? But then I was trying to figure out how to make it out of 100. So luckily I know about double number lines. I can always scale down if I need to find some more information. So maybe it would help me to know that if there were 20 students, just 8 of them would be playing soccer, right? That would be half of 40 and half of 16. And then maybe it would help me to say, oh, well, I could count by 20s, right? And I could put a 60 here. I could count by 20s along the bottom, and I could count by 8s along the top until I finally get to 40 out of 100. Either way, it's 40% of the students, right? So 16 out of 40 is 40%. Whether using the double number line or you're using the equivalent ratio proportion setup, we want to make sure that we're always trying to figure out that it's out of 100. And if you're using the proportion, which I do a lot, you'll always want to remember that you set it up with the part in the example out of the total or the whole, and that helps you find the percent out of 100. So that proportion setup is always in this particular format. And I'll leave you with one to just do either way for yourself, and make sure you have this visible for me when I'm checking your assignment. But if 3 out of 25 M&Ms are blue, what percentage of the M&Ms are blue, right? Do it either way that works for you. And remember, the essential question of this video was, how is a percentage like a ratio? And hopefully you have seen that a percent is really just a ratio out of 100.